There is a village in Greece that no one dares to call home. Not anymore. During the day, it looks like any other abandoned settlement. Silent, decayed, lost to time. But when the sun begins to set, something changes. The air grows unnaturally still. Shadows lengthen in ways that defy logic. Doors that were once bolted shut creak open, as if inviting something unseen inside. And those who linger beyond dusk, those foolish enough to test the village's curse, are never seen again. The locals don't speak its name aloud. To them, it is simply that place, a stain upon the land, whispered about only in hushed voices. Some say it was once a prosperous town, but something terrible happened there. Something that poisoned the very ground. Others claim the village never truly existed in the way we understand. A place that appears on maps, but does not belong to this world. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. No one stays after sunset. Over the years, thrill seekers and skeptics have tried to uncover the village's secrets. They bring cameras, voice recorders, notebooks filled with research on its haunted past. But when the night comes, their equipment is found scattered in the dust. Batteries drained, lenses cracked. No bodies, no blood. Just an overwhelming sense that something watched them until they vanished. Tonight, we explore the mystery of the cursed Greek village, a place where reality bends, where time fractures, and where something ancient still waits in the darkness. What happened here? Why does no one survive the night? And most importantly, what lives in the village after sundown? Are you ready to find out? The origins of the cursed village are shrouded in fear and contradiction. Even the oldest records contradict each other, as if history itself refuses to acknowledge what truly happened there. But through scattered fragments, whispers in forgotten texts, and the fearful recollections of those who live nearby, a terrible story emerges. Long ago, the village was known by a different name, a name that has been erased from every map, its letters scratched out in old documents as though saying it aloud might summon something best left buried. It was once a thriving settlement, rich with olive groves and fertile lands. Travelers passing through marveled at its beauty, the way the golden fields swayed under the Mediterranean sun. But beneath this prosperity, something dark festered. The first recorded tragedy occurred centuries ago, in the late 1600s. According to regional folklore, a priest arrived in the village, seeking refuge after being banished from his own parish. He was an outsider, dressed in tattered robes, his eyes hollow and sunken as if he had seen horrors no man should witness. The villagers took him in, but he did not pray. He did not bless their homes. Instead, he locked himself in the church's crypt, muttering in a language that no one recognized. For weeks, he remained underground. At night, villagers heard him chanting, low, guttural sounds that seeped through the cracks in the stone. Animals began to vanish. Crops withered overnight. The well water turned black, thick like tar. Then, one night, the priest emerged, but he was not the same. His face was pale, his skin stretched thin over his bones. His eyes, once dull and sunken, now gleamed with something unnatural, something hungry. He walked through the village without speaking, and those who met his gaze were never seen again. By morning, half the town had disappeared. The survivors fled in terror, leaving everything behind. When a neighboring village sent men to investigate, they found the town abandoned, the houses eerily untouched, as if their owners had simply dissolved into the night. But the church was different. The church was wrong. Inside, they found the priest's body slumped over the altar, his throat torn open, his mouth twisted in an expression of pure terror. Yet, there was no blood. Instead, An ancient symbol had been carved into his forehead, a sigil that no scholar has ever been able to decipher. And beneath the church, in the crypt where the priest had secluded himself, they found something worse. The coffin should have been occupied. There should have been a body, but the grave was empty. And on the inside of the lid, deep claw marks ran across the wood, as if something had been buried alive and tried desperately to escape. Terrified, the investigators sealed the church, blocking the entrance with heavy stones. The village was declared taboo, its name removed from records, its lands left to rot. And over the centuries, it faded into myth, until those foolish enough to ignore the warnings began to seek it out. They say that at night, the church bell still tolls, even though the bell tower collapsed long ago. They say that if you step inside the village after sunset, you will hear whispering voices, some pleading, some laughing, some calling your name. And they say that whatever was buried beneath that church, whatever scratched at the coffin lid centuries ago, is still there, waiting, and it is hungry. Daniel shouldn't be here. He knows that. The warnings were clear. Every local he had spoken to, every bartender, every old man in the village square, had told him the same thing. Do not go to that place. Do not set foot in the cursed village. And if you are foolish enough to go, leave before the sun disappears. But Daniel wasn't like the others. He was an investigative journalist, a documentarian who prided himself on uncovering the truth behind myths and superstitions. He had exposed cults, debunked so-called haunted places, and survived more than one angry mob when his findings shattered their long-held beliefs. This was just another story, another legend waiting to be dismantled. And so, with a camera bag in the back seat and a flashlight strapped to his belt, he ignored the warnings and pressed forward. The village was exactly as he had expected, silent, crumbling, abandoned. The air smelled of dry earth and rotting wood. Old stone houses stood like empty tombs, their windows hollow and dark. He parked the car at the edge of the village, stepping out into the eerie quiet. No birds, no wind, just an unnatural stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Daniel pulled out his camera and pressed record. February 12th, 6:37 p.m. Entering the abandoned village. Locals claim no one stays here after sunset. Let's see why. His voice sounded too loud in the silence, like a disruption in a place that had long forgotten human presence. He tried to shake the feeling, chalking it up to nerves. But there was something wrong here. Something he couldn't yet explain. The houses still had furniture inside. Wooden chairs sat around dining tables, covered in a thick layer of dust. A cup of tea, long evaporated, rested beside a book left open mid-sentence. It was as if the villagers had left in a hurry, or vanished all at once. He found a tavern near the village square, its sign creaking in the wind. The door was unlocked. Inside, the tables were still set, plates and silverware untouched. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but there were no cobwebs, no insects, no signs of decay beyond the passage of time. It was as if the village had been preserved in unnatural stasis, waiting for something or someone. He knew the legends, the cursed priest, the empty coffin, the symbols carved into the crypt walls. Daniel had come here expecting a forgotten ruin, a simple mystery to explain away. But standing in that village, staring up at that church, he felt something he hadn't anticipated. Doubt. Maybe the legends weren't just stories. Maybe. A sound. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. Somewhere deep within the village, a door creaked open. He wasn't alone. It had come from a house at the far end of the village, just past the church. A house whose door had been firmly shut only moments ago. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing logic to take hold. The wind. It had to be the wind. But there was no wind. Still, he couldn't back down now. He had come to expose a myth, not to become part of one. He lifted his flashlight and camera and stepped toward the house. The house looked like all the others, abandoned, untouched for decades. A wooden table with an overturned chair, a faded tapestry hanging from the wall, a fireplace choked with ash. But there was something different, something off. The dust on the floor was disturbed. There were footprints, fresh ones, leading deeper into the house. Daniel's pulse quickened. His journalistic instincts screamed at him to capture everything, to follow the story wherever it led. But his gut, his survival instinct, whispered something else. Leave. He ignored it. The room was small and windowless, its only feature a rickety wooden wardrobe standing against the wall. The footprints led directly to it. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight. His breath was shallow, his skin clammy. His mind raced through possibilities. A squatter, an animal, his own paranoia. There was only one way to know. He reached out and pulled the wardrobe door open. A tunnel, a hidden path leading beneath the village. Daniel's mouth went dry. He hadn't read about this. No records, no eyewitness accounts had ever mentioned underground tunnels. His camera lens focused on the gaping darkness before him, and for a split second, his flashlight beam caught something. Movement. A shadow, shifting deep within the tunnel. And then, a whisper. Low, ragged, and impossibly close. You shouldn't be here. His rational mind collapsed. There was no explaining this. No easy answer. He turned and ran. His boots pounded against the wooden floor, his camera bouncing against his chest as he fled through the open door and into the village square. The sun had nearly disappeared beyond the hills. The sky was bruised purple, the last light of day slipping away. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before night fell completely. And then he heard it. The bell. The air turned frigid. The shadows stretched unnaturally. The whispering returned, no longer distant, no longer subtle. Voices, so many voices, some pleading, some laughing, some calling his name. Daniel. He ran. He didn't know where. Toward the car, toward safety. But deep down, he knew the truth. There was nowhere to run. The sun had set, and now they were coming. The voices were growing louder. They weren't coming from a single place. They were everywhere, whispering from the cracks in the walls, from the empty windows, from the deep, endless dark beyond the village. He could hear footsteps behind him, soft at first, then faster, then running. Daniel dared not look back. He reached the car, fumbling for the keys in his pocket. His hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped them. And then, the engine wouldn't start. The buildings were no longer empty ruins. Figures stood in the doorways, their faces obscured by darkness. Dozens of them, unmoving, watching. The tavern's shattered windows glowed with a sickly yellow light. Shadows flickered inside, shifting unnaturally. The church bell tolled again, long and deep, vibrating through Daniel's bones. And then, the laughter began. Not the warm laughter of a village festival, but something hollow, twisted, mocking. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. This wasn't just a cursed village. It was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Daniel slammed his foot against the pedal, his hands twisting the key desperately. A flicker, then a cough, then the engine roared to life. He didn't hesitate. He didn't breathe. He threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the cracked road, and sped out of the village. The figures didn't chase him. They simply stood there, watching, their hollow laughter echoing in his ears as the headlights cut through the night. As if they knew something he didn't. He didn't stop driving. Not for miles. Not until the village was far behind him, swallowed by the mountains. Only then did he pull over, his body shaking, his breath shallow. He grabbed the camera from the passenger seat, rewinding the footage with shaking fingers. He needed proof. He needed to see what he had captured. But when the video played, there was nothing there. No voices, no figures, no whispering. Just static, and his own terrified breathing. A man in old tattered robes, a face pale as death, staring directly at the camera. And then he smiled. Daniel's stomach lurched, because in that split second before the screen cut to black, he realized something. The man wasn't in the village anymore. He was standing behind Daniel's car. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His instincts screamed at him to floor the gas, to put as much distance as possible between himself and that cursed village. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't just the village anymore. Whatever haunted that place was no longer bound to it. He tried to tell himself it was over, that he had escaped. But the air inside the car had changed. It was too still. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. A suffocating dread curled around his lungs. And then, a breath. Soft, slow, right behind him. Daniel's blood turned to ice. And a voice, low, rasping, filled with amusement, whispered two words that shattered his sanity. Keep driving. Daniel was never the same after that night. He never spoke about the village again. But those who knew him noticed the change, the way he avoided mirrors, how he never stayed out after sunset, how he always kept driving, never stopping for too long. And sometimes, when the night was particularly quiet, he swore he could hear it. That bell, tolling from somewhere just beyond sight, calling him back. Some places are never meant to be disturbed. Some legends are not just stories. The cursed Greek village still stands, abandoned yet never truly empty. No one stays after sunset, and those who do never leave.